If there's one thing that I might want to teach you or want you to remember, it's this. The opposite of happiness is not unhappiness. The opposite of happiness is loneliness. The opposite of happiness is loneliness. And there's a lot of research and psychology, some of which I've shared in other videos, but basically what research has found is that loneliness or feeling of isolation is as bad for your physical and mental health as things like being a pack-a-day smoker, being significantly obese, traumatic stresses. It really negatively impacts your quality of life and negatively impacts how long you live. And so if we want to be happier, increase our quality of life, it pays to focus on our relationships. And there's a really powerful snippet from Martin Seligman and Ed Diener, two of the most prominent positive psychologists, these folks who research happiness and well-being and human flourishing. And basically what they found in their research is this: social relationships form a necessary but not sufficient condition for high happiness. That is, they do not guarantee high happiness, but it does not appear to occur without them. So what that means is that strong, healthy relationships are a prerequisite. They're a requirement for happiness. And so the way they frame that, and they're very specific about the wording because that's from like a research paper, very formal. So they're saying, now, if you have really great relationships and maybe there's other issues, really big issues in your life, yeah, maybe you won't be totally happy. But it's impossible to be happy if you don't have the relationships, right? It's that prerequisite. It is a requirement needed to flourish and have a great life. So in this video, I thought I'd try to be somewhat actionable, and some of these draw on some social psychology, some of these draw on more, maybe we'll say self-improvement and things I've read from business leaders, from speakers, from teachers, but I want to just give you these 7 habits of happier relationships, and of all the things I've read and all the books, and I've studied kind of persuasion and communication, again, some of the psychology, but also just life, experience of life. I really found that these are some of the most powerful habits for better relationships. Number 1 is to be a dog. Be a dog. Maybe you can write these down. Be a dog. Well, what do I mean by that? I mean, give your wholehearted attention. There's Dale Carnegie, who is an incredible author and speaker, and he was one of the pioneers of the movement of kind of practical psychology and helping people to improve their lives. He says the secret to being interesting is to be interested. The secret to being interesting is being interested. You can make more friends, build better relationships, all that, way more in 2 weeks of becoming interested in others than you will if you could spend 2 years trying to get other people to be interested in you. Now, I say be a dog because I want to tell you the secret that dogs use. And now this comes, like I said at the beginning, I'm drawing from a lot of different things here. This comes from a talk by Peter Kaufman on multidisciplinary thinking. He's a hedge fund manager, one of the world's leading investors, and he talks about the secret of what dogs do. So whenever you get home and your dog is out in the backyard, it's actually talking to the neighbor dog. You don't believe me, but I'm going to tell you. I'm going to tell you what that dog says. So your dog's out back, he's chilling with the neighbor dog, and he says, "Hey, can you believe how easy it is to manipulate human beings and just get them to do whatever you want them to do for you?" And the neighbor dog says, "Yeah, piece of cake. I know." And they start talking, and he said, "Well, right, all you have to do is every time they come home, you just greet them with the biggest unconditional show of attention and interest and affection. And the best part, you only have to do it for about 20 seconds, and then you can just go back to whatever you were doing before. The only rule is you have to do it every time they come home. And really think about it, right? Do you want to be paid attention to? Right? Do you want people to give you their attention? Right? Do you want people to be interested in you? Yeah. And so when this dog shows up, right, do you think that you're, as an owner, you're getting that feeling of attention and interest and affection? Of course you are. And now what does the dog get in return? Everything. The dog gets everything. And if you actually think about it, the dog is the only animal on planet Earth that gets taken care of and doesn't have to do anything else, right? We've got horses, but they've got to, do shows, or they've got to race, they've got to plow the fields. We have cows, we take care of cows, but they have to give milk or end up giving beef. We got to take care of chickens, but they have to give us dogs. They get a free ride. And why? Because they were smart enough to know that if you just become just fully attentive and give your wholehearted attention and interest to people, people can't help but love you. And so I joke about this because I think Peter Kaufman delivers this with a funny story, but it's not about like manipulating people or doing this in a way that's fake, but it's simply showing that becoming genuinely interested in others, giving your wholehearted attention and greeting them with enthusiasm, if you just do that, what will you get back from people? Everything. So be a dog. Number one, focus on that wholehearted attention and interest and engagement when you meet other people. And I don't say meet just when you meet new people, but most importantly, the people you care about most. Okay, number two, and this comes from my background as a executive coach and performance coach. Listen with your whole being. Listen with your whole being. Now this is called presence, and it is the foundation for active listening. You need to be there. Again, I say listen with your whole being because a lot of times we're just kind of up in our heads and maybe we're noticing the words, but we're not really totally present. At least for me, listening with my whole being reminds me to just be fully immersed in what's going on right in front of me. And it helps me tune in, I think, on an emotional level too, because active listening is about listening not just for words, but also for the emotion behind the words and the changes in the body, right? Like, it's not just listening with your ears even. Right? You're listening with your eyes and you're reading the person, and it's amazing the things we can pick up when we listen in this way. So how do you do this? Well, I use the analogy of if you ever watched baseball or played baseball, how stepping into the batter's box, they have this very kind of specific ritual to get into the box and get in the zone. You don't have to do anything that expressive, but you should think of taking a moment to ground in, to prepare, and to kind of step into the box and be totally present when you are encountering other people. And now that's the foundation. And so how do we continue this listening with your whole being? And I'll share a few tips on active listening that can be really, really helpful. And I encourage you to experiment with them the next time you talk to someone and they might notice, hey, this conversation's a little different. So number one thing is seek to understand. And for me, this involves dropping my sort of mental agenda of where we need to go and just focusing on hearing every word and hearing what's not in the words as well. Like I touched on, the emotions and the tone and the expression. And with that, you're also withholding judgment. That doesn't mean, and especially there are times in business or when your kid says, can I have a piece of chocolate cake? And you need to say no, I get it. But really just trying to understand. Right? Asking then, what goes with that is a lot of these short, open-ended questions. Say more about that. How was that for you? Or how does that feel? Right? Again, hitting on some of the nonverbal. Right? So seeking to understand and then mixing in some of these shorter, open-ended questions can be really, really powerful. Maybe even drill in of, well, why is that important to you? Right? And that helps get to the real issue sometimes, or the real deeper meat of that conversation or that interaction. And final tip that I'll give on this active listening piece is what I call really, really effective thing for, I think, deepening your conversations and being a better listener is I call it holding it up to them. And this is just simply a skill where, a lot of times what you can do to best help people in terms of like listening and in a conversation and in an interaction is to be kind of a mirror and just help them process and think through and understand what they're going through and what they're talking about. And so holding it up to them is just, they say something, you are listening to understand, right, with your full attention, and then you simply repeat it or paraphrase it back to them. So you say, basically, I might say, oh, well, I feel like I'm struggling right now with my work-life balance, Jackson, and it's just, I'm a little stressed out, and I feel like I'm a little frantic and just don't know what to do. So you might say, oh, okay. So I hear you say that work-life balance is a challenge right now, and with that, you're feeling this stress and you're just sort of unsure, and there's some tension in your body around maybe what to do or how you should be spending your time. Is that right? Yeah, that is right. Amazing how just holding it up to them, and you don't have to be super mechanical about this, and you don't have to do it every single time, but it just shows them you're listening and it helps you actually understand and connect with them on a deep level. So that was a lot under number 2. Not all of these are going to be that extensive, but listen with your whole being. So having that little ritual to start where you're grounding in and being fully present. And then that active listening of seeking to understand, short, open-ended questions, listening for more than just the words, and then holding it up to them. I would really encourage you to experiment with that in maybe your next conversation with it. Could be with a friend, it could be with a partner, be with a colleague, and just see how that maybe changes things. Okay, number 3, note what matters to them. Note what matters to them. And there's a story of this, I forget her name, but she was like a VP at some global bank and super successful, and she had this habit she would do where she would just, after every conversation with someone, she would just take a couple quick notes in a file on what they talked about. And she had this big master file for all the people she worked with and some friends and even maybe extended family members. And every time then she'd have a conversation, she would just take 20 seconds to look at that file before the conversation, go into it, and another 20 seconds to update it after. And so imagine the difference there, though. If you say, hey, Jackson, how are you today? How's your week been? Oh, pretty good. How about you? All right, yeah, good. Okay, let's talk. Versus if you could say, oh, hey, Jackson, I remember when we talked a couple months ago, you just got a new puppy named Fritz, and you were thinking about doing this course for the University of Alabama, and what's going on with those things? Amazing. That difference is huge. And so I encourage you to take notes sort of more formally, not just for people you work with, but maybe friends, maybe family. Try to just keep tabs on it. But it can also just be mental notes, right? Like, you don't have to be totally neurotic and obsessive, and you might be like, Jackson, you're like being crazy here with taking notes on, right? The idea, I get it, but the idea is to take notes either literally or mentally, but focusing on what matters to others. And this almost goes back to that first tip I said of, if you want to be interesting, be interested. Just simply taking the time and focus to highlight their interests and the things that matter to them will go a really long way in helping you to be closer to people. Number 4, never argue. This again comes from Dale Carnegie. He says, the only way to win an argument is to avoid it. And if you're like me and you love to argue and you love to be competitive and you think that you win a lot of arguments, I challenge you to think about, has that ever actually worked? Have you ever been in an argument, shouting match, like, you don't know what the hell you're talking about. No, you don't. And all of a sudden the other person is like, you know what? I am wrong and you're right. Right? You're out on the road rage and someone cuts you off and you say, "You SOB, you cut me off." And they say, "You know, now that you mention it, thank you for pointing that out. I shouldn't have cut you off." It just doesn't work. There's a lot of psychology here of these cognitive biases we have for things like consistency. Number one, we have an internal desire to be consistent with our previous beliefs and actions. Really strong one. You can look at the work of Robert Cialdini, folks like that who study kind of the psychology of influence. You talk a lot about this. Consistency. I just said consistency. Another one is reciprocity. So again, this is the mirroring idea that we tend to reciprocate what's given to us, right? Someone does us a favor, we feel inclined to do them a favor. If we think about those really two powerful psychological principles, we start to understand why arguing pretty much never works. Is because number one, the person has a really strong desire for internal consistency, so they don't want to change their mind. And number two, when it's framed as an argument, right, it feels defensive. So that reciprocity, right, like you're coming at me, I want to come at you, and it just spirals. So this doesn't mean you have to agree with everyone, of course, and it doesn't mean you can't give constructive feedback or criticism or disagree or even sort of debate something. But generally, probably 95% of the arguments we get into, there's no point, there's no thing, there's no tangible progress or outcome. We're much better off just either saying, hey, this doesn't matter, or we can reframe it, either come back to it later, or we simply just kind of shift and turn it into this, well, maybe I'm wrong, or maybe we're both wrong, or maybe there is no right answer. But just simply dropping the argument piece of it will go a really long way and probably save you a lot of pain in your relationships. All right, number 5, see the wounded dog. See the wounded dog. What do I mean by that? It's basically this idea of assume least malice, or assume it's not personal. Mark Twain, the great author, said something like 90% of the worst things that happened in my life never actually happened, speaking to this idea of how we tend to assume the worst, and a lot of times it's just the mind inventing things. I remember a story when I first started working with my business partner, Paul. We were going back and forth about our partnership and a book we were co-authoring, and I emailed him and he didn't email me back. And days went by, I kept waiting, and finally I started to think, like, this guy, he said he wanted to work with me. I wrote chapters of his book for him and with him, and we started planning our partnership, and now he's just ignoring me like this is unbelievable. And finally I checked my outbox, and the email was sitting in there with the red exclamation point, and it had never sent. Yes, I'm very enlightened. But how often does that happen? And how often does that happen when things we don't even know about, right? Like your person you really love doesn't text you back, and you're sitting there anxious, freaking out, like, what's going on? And then a few days later you get a text from them that says, hey, sorry, I dropped my phone in the water and it was busted and I just got a new one back. And all of a sudden, everything changes inside. But a lot of that comes because we tend to assume the worst, or we tend to assume it's personal, we tend to assume it's bad intent. And the reason this is the wounded dog thing is because Tara Brach, really incredible meditation teacher, tells the story of, imagine you're walking in the woods and this big German shepherd comes up to you and it's growling and some foam at the mouth and it starts barking. It's really, and it's, aggressive, and oh my gosh, how do you feel? Now, you look down and you see that around in its back paw, there's a little trap. There's a trap that's caught in its paw and it's bleeding. Oh, everything changes, right? So when people who are really difficult in your life, often the most difficult people, you need to see the wounded dog in them. Someone treats you poorly, someone says something short to you, maybe even someone cuts you off. Maybe they just got fired from their job. They had a terrible day at work, or they're rushing home to take care of their sick kid. Right? Maybe the person you really care about said that mean thing to you because they care so much about you and they're a little insecure about how they feel. If you can just see that trap or that pain in someone, that suffering there, know that every person has that. And so it's not you. It's never personal. It's almost always going to be this least malice, right? That we all have that kind of wounded dog, and that should help you a lot in dealing with difficult people. Okay. Number 6, smile. And this one, there's actually a good amount of like neuroscience and stuff here just showing that there's this crazy reverse mind-body connection where if I just smile, maybe don't do it too much or too aggressively like that because people will be like, you're weird. But just smiling actually releases positive hormones and endorphins in the same way that you think, oh, I feel good, so I'm going to smile. You smile, it makes you feel good. So very good for you. And it also goes back to this idea of in our brains, we have these mirror neurons. We tend to mirror the emotions of others. And so I smile at you and you smile at me. And it's kind of the gift that keeps on giving, to be very cliche, but it really does. It sounds so obvious, but yet we just don't remember to do it. And from the same guy, Peter Kaufman, he talks about this elevator example, and I encourage you to do this little test. He says on the importance of kind of smiling and being positive and initiating that positivity. It says, so imagine you go into an elevator, right? You open it, there's someone standing there, and you just don't really do anything. You kind of nod at them and get in. 99% of the time, what do? They nod and sit there. Okay, so scenario number 2, you open the elevator, person standing there, and you sort of snarl and hiss and try and grumble at them. What do they do back 99% of the time? They snarl, they hiss, grumble, mean, frustrated. Third scenario, person comes down, elevator door opens, and you're, hey. Maybe you don't even say hey, you just greet them with a smile. What do they do back 99% of the time? Smile. So simply smiling immediately is going to make you feel better, make the other person feel better, and it's that magic of the elevator test that Peter Kaufman describes that can, honestly, something as simple as remembering to smile a little bit more can really change your relationships and how you relate to people in your daily life. Now, finally, number 7, show you care. Show you care, show your affection, and particularly actions, not just words. I'll share a story from my personal life about this, that I had this habit of, again, habits of I try to do things that show I care, that I'm thinking of people. I text them on their birthday, I get little gifts. And my senior year of high school, I was traveling and stayed in Costa Rica and brought back this little souvenir bottle of guaro, which is this alcohol made from sugar cane. And you're probably thinking, oh, that sounds pretty good. It's disgusting. I'll tell you that much. But anyway, I brought it back and gave it to my assistant soccer coach, who was like 25 or something at that time. And it was just a little gift, like, hey man, I care about you, thinking of you. And so flash forward about 4 or 5 years, and I got invited to his wedding. And we went. He married a beautiful girl, super nice, great couple, and now they have a great family. And that night at the wedding, we were talking. He's like, dude, did I ever tell you a story of how we met? Or how we kind of got started like dating? I was like, no. And he says, so we were camp counselors. The start of every great story. We were at this summer camp, and we were out one day kind of at my car, and we had been like kind of talking and maybe flirting a little, but we didn't really know like what we were doing. And so we were out in my car the one day like after work, and we were just like hanging out, and we saw this little bottle of guaro, like water bottle. And you see where this is going. They were like, okay, we're gonna split it, right? So they each split it, which is like 3 or 4 shots each. And he's like, next thing you know, we kind of in the car, we start making out, right? And like that was the first night, and like we kind of started dating after that, and we boyfriend and girlfriend. And then right, flash forward, like I said, I'm at their wedding. So these little habits of actually showing we care, showing our affection, showing the people who matter that they do in fact matter. The ripple effects of those little things are pretty unbelievable. So there you have it. Right? Number 1, be a dog. Give your wholehearted attention. Number 2, listen with your whole being. Be present and be an active listener. Number 3, note what matters to them. Number 4, never argue. Number 5 is see the wounded dog in people. Assume least malice, assume it's not personal. Number 6, smile. And number 7, show you care. Now, there's a lot there, but what I want to leave you with at the end of this video is to have you actually pick some sort of habit, some sort of intention around the relationships dimension of your life. That could be one of these, but it could also be something kind of simpler, more like I want to give a compliment every day, or I want to show someone I care about them in some small way every day, or some larger way, maybe once a week, or even as something simple as I want to just schedule time out. An hour a week, time blocked on the calendar. That is my time for me and my partner, or for me to call an old friend. That's one I do. Every Saturday I do. I call it my relationship roulette, because I have this list of all my friends and people in my contacts, and I just kind of roll the dice on one, and I'm like, oh, I'm going to call that person, whatever it is. So now, if you are doing this as part of, let me say it one quick word, if you're doing this as part of my Happier Habits course or the Happier Habits project, you've already picked one big habit by now. This, if you've already picked one that kind of has to do with relationships, you can sit this part out. But if the big habit you picked earlier in the program is not relationship specific, this can be a relationship specific one to add in. Okay? And now if you're not in the course and you're just doing it right, you can follow along and check out some of my other videos where I explain sort of more in depth how to engineer a lasting habit. But go ahead and pick one very tangible thing, one thing you can focus on from this list or just in general in your relationship dimension. And my challenge to you as we wrap up this video is to actually bring that into your life and just witness how it changes your quality of life. Because as I said at the outset, the opposite of happiness is loneliness. Our happiness and our quality of life depend upon quality relationships, right? Social relationships are a necessary condition for a happier life.